it seems like the media here are stuck in the kind of early 2000s where they think takeover equals war chests and all that, and that simply just doesn't happen in football anymore.
There are people at the club who need to be aware that this is the standard now, and you cannot get complacent. Everyone must be laser focused.
There was chances there for Scottish football or teams in Scotland to go out and beat Celtic or give them a game. They simply don't. How many times have you seen Kasper Schmeichel warming up because he's Baltic during the game and he's got nothing to do?
Are Celtic boring? Are trebles tedious? That's this week on 20 Minute Tims. I'm your host Jamie, joined by Melly.
Yes.
And Stephen.
Hello.
Not often a stir is made by the Scottish mainstream media.
No.
But we postponed things a day, and it was just in time for that to land. And there was an article in the Herald by a journalist who I will check on my phone his name shortly, Melly, after I pass to you. He said, "Sorry, Brendan, this treble is tedious." And I think it would be fair to say, gents, that there's been a lot of discourse around this on our Discord, on social media, lots of phrases about Celtic being boring lately. This is the first time, excuse me, someone's actually come out and said trebles are boring, trebles are tedious. It sort of ties into fans leaving early. There was a photograph of fans leaving early, and that's been on the agenda for a while, Melly. So what did you make of this when you first saw that opinion shared?
Clickbait nonsense. But
ram it.
Yes, ram it.
And that's this week's episode.
But you can either just take it as clickbait nonsense, or you can read the article and have a think about it. And while it may look from afar that trebles are boring to people, myself, I really enjoyed the game at the weekend. It was good fun, but at the same time, we have to look at it from a Celtic point of view and a Scottish football point of view. And yes, it might look boring for the rest of Scottish football. Us as fans maybe don't find it boring, but if you're looking at it from afar, is Celtic winning all the time good for us as well? That's probably a question we need to look at as well.
Stephen, the name of the article is, "Sorry, Brendan, but this is going to be the most tedious treble of all time," by Callum Crowe. And the gist of it was what Melly touched on there. It was from a outsider's point of view. If you're not a Celtic fan, it is a wee bit boring watching Celtic scoop up trophy after trophy. The question about, is this boring for Celtic fans, was posited. And then there was a wider question about, is it good for Celtic? Is it good for Scottish football? So there is, beyond the headline, there's a wee bit to dig into there.
I think that's a key distinction to make. Obviously, it's a very inflammatory headline to describe a treble as tedious, or the most tedious treble ever, or whatever it was framed as. So, of course, that's the nature of it these days, that clickbait nonsense, as we've already said. But behind the headline, it is probably a discussion worth having, because it kind of follows on from the back of something we just spoke about last week, about people leaving early, and Celtic almost, well, in previous weeks anyways, particularly after the St Johnstone game, and previously having lost to Rangers, lost a couple of games in fairly quick succession, not in a row. And we started to talk about Celtic maybe limping over the line a little bit and people leaving early. So it follows on from the back of this. I think there's two ways to look, at least two ways, and we can explore maybe other ones as well. So I think that, is it boring from a Celtic fan's perspective to be constantly winning trebles? I think the answer to that, from my perspective, is categorically no. It is not boring to be going along to two games and watching, particularly a game like that at Hampden, where it's glorious sunshine and Celtic are playing really well. And I described it, Jamie, you and I did our match reaction to it immediately after the game, and I described the Scottish Cup as something that we almost take as our trophy now. Yeah. It's Celtic's trophy, to all intents and purposes, in the last decade. To go to Hampden in the sun, as the famous song goes, and deliver a performance like that in what we have come to expect as Celtic's trophy, that's never going to become boring or tedious, or any word you'd care to use. I flatly reject the idea that us going to games, or even watch it across the globe, people watching games and get out, being able to celebrate these wins and trophies with friends, family, whatever it is, that will never become boring. But then the other element to it is that, is it long term, kind of casting into the future here, is it potentially damaging for Scottish football and Celtic to have such little competition? So that's a completely different angle from, we're fans, we want to see our team winning basically every game. We want to see 5-0 victories all the time. That'll never become boring. But is there anything to the notion that we've maybe crossed into the point of diminishing returns when it comes to Celtic winning trebles from the outside? As Melly's already put it, from an outsider looking in, has this become less of a spectacle now to watch a team dominate so heavily.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. I think there is a lot to discuss there. To answer the opening question, is it the most tedious treble of all time? Unfortunately for Neil Lennon, no. I think the treble Neil Lennon won over COVID, over sort of split over two separate seasons, was the least satisfying treble I think I've ever seen Celtic win. So from my personal point of view, no, it's not the. Is it the most exciting treble I've ever seen Celtic win? We've not. First of all, we've not won it yet.
No.
Aye, and also listen to what we're saying here.
Yeah.
The most tedious treble of the 8 that have ever been won.
The treble sort of became something else, hasn't it? Because when we first started speaking of trebles, it was this thing that never ever happened. And as Melly said a couple of weeks ago, every treble's had a story attached to it. And this is the season, kind of, even though we didn't win one last year, where it's just become accepted that Celtic win trebles all the time, but we've only won it twice in 4 years.
Remember when we started doing this podcast, it was under Ronnie Dylan. He'd come out and said, no, we want to win the treble. And I was like, whoa, you can't come out and say that.
Yeah.
Now we demand it each season. It's sort of seen as a poor season if we don't land the treble.
But I think a lot of it has to do with this tedious feeling. I can't speak for other fans, but if you do feel like it's tedious Celtic winning all these trebles, well, it's no Celtic's fault, really. That it's not really a criticism of Celtic to say that. It's a criticism of all the other teams in the league. They need to get their act together and put forward. I'm so nervous about talking like this because we have still got a cup final to play.
Yeah,
but
on that, the caveat here, the disclaimer is we are responding to an article written about whether it is about to become the most tedious treble. We're not saying, we are desperately trying not to act like it's already won, because I think
can
that's
already
very
see the clips
dangerous.
flying about. I can already see the clips flying about. So I'm interested to see what the rest of Scottish football makes of this opinion. On the question of whether this treble or this season has been boring for Celtic fans, me in particular, I think boring's not the word. I think things have started to pick up though, and I think how I feel about Celtic is really tied to a lot of the performances that the team are putting in when you're going to see them and things are feeling a bit flat. And we can all admit that now. Brendan Rodgers admitted it a couple of weeks ago it was flat, but we've had a few good showings, particularly that game at Hampden was absolutely brilliant. I think not beating Rangers a couple of weeks ago has left a bit of a lingering. That took a bit of air out of the balloon.
Popped the balloon for, I'd say.
It did pop. I think a lot of people are scunnered by that, and I think we've got an opportunity to put that right, and that game is going to be honestly massive. I think that game at Ibrox is going to be massive. So no, it's not. I don't find Celtic's relentless winning boring, because as a fan it's good to be part of these moments. It's good to be there at Hampden on the final, the closing day of the season. It's great to celebrate all the success and everything that comes along with it. And if you think it's boring, try being a Rangers fan, try being a Hearts fan, try being a Hibs fan. Like, I'm sure I can guarantee you these guys are way more bored than us every season. So, but I think there is something about this season lacking a bit, particularly in the last couple of weeks, lacking a bit of spark, lacking a bit of pizzazz. And we're across social media. We do a podcast. People get in touch with us all the time, whether it's on the Discord, which you can access on Patreon if you want to be part of that, whether it's on X or even just out and about when people bump into us, they want to talk to us about the game and stuff like that, which is
they shout things.
Yeah, which is they shout things, which is absolutely.
You beardy twat.
Yeah, is that what you get?
But
but the word that kept coming up over the past couple of weeks was boring, really. Like that is a theme that has run through a lot of the feedback that we're hearing about this season. It's a bit boring, isn't it? But I do honestly tie that to the lackluster performances since the turn of the year.
I think so. The boringness, even though I just listed trebles, isn't it? But it has become, I think you're right, it's the Rangers game for me sticks out because it's such a hard one to take. We all know we sat here and lauded it up when Barry Ferguson was appointed Rangers manager. Bad results came, and then he comes to Celtic Park and wins, and that this wasn't meant to happen, lads. So I think that's really, because if you take that game away, I think the rest of the season's been fine. There's going to be games where you don't win. Yes, there's that game at Ibrox that sort of looked like the outlier, but it doesn't anymore. And along the way, when you look back to previous seasons and trebles, what's made them stand out? Because under Ange's second season, Celtic ran away with the league, but on the way to the treble, they put Rangers out the cup in the semi-final and they beat them in a final as well. So you had that. Rangers have been put out both cups. Well, Celtic have beat them in one and then they had a disaster in the other. It just doesn't feel like... And they weren't in the league at all. There was no competition, really.
There's
not that rivalry like we had in that season. Ange's first season felt like it was nip and tuck. Last season was the same, where you had that to and fro. This season, it just seems like Celtic have been so far ahead, yet they've been beaten by them. And it's not it's just annoying that we've been beaten by them because we really shouldn't have. So cup final was good, getting the penalty win, but then that game at Ibrox and then the game at Celtic Park has really sullied the win for us, and it's just got to that point where Celtic's results haven't been great, the performances haven't come along, but we've picked up again, and I don't know, I can't quite put my finger on it why something just feels different this season. I don't know what it is.
How does it feel for the rest of Scottish football, Stephen? Because there's obviously a discussion where Celtic being as relentlessly the winningest football team we've ever seen in the past couple of years. Celtic being this relentless and marching after trophy after trophy, being basically the outright favourites for every single trophy every year. Is there a wider discussion to be had about how that might impact the quality of Scottish football overall?
I don't know about impacting it, because obviously the thing that comes up time and again is that no team outside Celtic or Rangers have won the league for however many decades it is now, 40 odd years. But that's not likely to happen, and it doesn't really happen that much in other countries either. That usually it's kind of 1, 2 or 3 teams that win most of the leagues. So I don't know if Celtic winning all this much impacts anyone else, because what we said at the start of this is that it's kind of other teams' fault that they can't. It's a combination of both. It's a combination of teams maybe not maximising the likes of recruitment and smart managerial appointments and basically focusing on everything and getting better as good as they possibly can. At the same time, Celtic are just so financially monstrous in this league that it's very difficult to do anything about it. This seems like an outlier, though. It does seem like an outlier where Celtic have been relatively unchallenged for a really sustained period in this season in particular. I think it might get better. No, we've got a takeover to fear in the next year or so.
Honestly, could not care less.
I know. I've enjoyed the coverage of it, though, because it seems like the media here are stuck in the kind of early 2000s where they think takeover equals war chests and all that, and that simply just doesn't happen in football anymore.
By the way, I'm actually the opposite. I want the Rangers takeover to go well, because that team cannot be an ongoing shambles forever and ever and ever, and then it's just about more excuse deletion. Do you know what I mean? If they get the takeover next year and we win the next 3 in a row, what's next? Like, some guys come over from America and bought Rangers, this billionaires there's no chips left for them to cash in once this takeover goes. So there's part of me that does want to see Rangers achieve this takeover, get rid of all the excuses, get rid of the shambles, and hopefully that would propel Celtic onto meeting that challenge.
That's the main thing, isn't it? Because we've sat here a lot of times and go, look, Celtic are doing well, they're this winning machine, but when you scratch beneath the surface, take out Brendan Rodgers, take out Ange Postecoglou, what's left? If Celtic go and appoint a sort of rookie manager and the structure's not behind them, it's not a guarantee that Celtic will be good because they've got the money behind them, and that's what we want Celtic to push on and get the infrastructure ready. So it's just pop out a manager, put in the next one. We don't have that, and maybe this takeover's the kick up the backside Celtic need to sort of push on a bit.
I don't think there's really any mystery about why people are feeling a bit jaded and a bit bored about this season, because people looking for stories and experiences when they go to football. You know, you support Celtic and that's what you do, and you go to the games and that's part of being a Celtic fan, but every season you're looking for new and interesting stories. And this year, okay, Daizen Maeda's came out the woodwork. Look how enthusiastic everyone is about Maeda, but I think there's a sort of lack of real heroes about the Celtic team, like new exciting players that people have bought into. There's also a question of, we are just relentlessly winning. We obviously beat Rangers in the cup, but any movie writer doesn't write a script where there's no challenge. The hero just turns up, the bad guy falls down the stairs and breaks his own neck, and then the hero gets the girl. Like, that would be a pretty boring movie, and that's kind of what we are going through. So I can understand a wee bit why Celtic fans.
I'd watch that.
It's like naked girdles.
Slips on a banana peel, falls backwards down the stairs, straight out the door.
And then the guy just gets the girl, and that's the end of the movie, and that's kind of the one that we're watching this year. How does it impact Scottish football, though? I don't really think there's very little that Celtic can really do about that. It's really for these other clubs, isn't it, to get their act together?
This isn't I wouldn't say this is a vintage Celtic team. It's a good Celtic team, but looking across the team at the weekend, you had your backup goalie in there. Liam Scales is maybe won his place back over Austin Trusty. Greg Taylor's been in and out. in the midfield. We've had moans about Engels, Hatate. Has this been Callum McGregor's best season? Adam Ida's not been starting. So this, and then James Forrest in and Jota and Cooner on the bench. This isn't a Celtic team that's been a team that you go, oh, that Celtic team's brilliant, that'll be one for the ages. And maybe that's played into a bit that players have come in and out, players have been off form, new guys have come in and haven't quite hit the heights we'd expected them to. So that could be a wee factor in it. And that's as well comes into the Scottish football chat as well. This isn't a vintage Celtic team. It's a good team, done well, played well, but none of the players are all cementing their places. They're not players that are going on to bigger and better things. There was chances there for Scottish football or teams in Scotland to go out and beat Celtic or give them a game. They simply don't. How many times have you seen Kasper Schmeichel warming up because he's Baltic during the game and he's got nothing to do?
I think there's part of it is, creating these stories about Celtic and finding these stories about Celtic season that make things a wee bit more exciting. Like, if I don't know if Celtic do this anymore, but if they released a DVD of every year that we've been doing the podcast, it would be like, did we start it when Ronnie Dyla?
Second season.
So when Rangers came back, was that season?
Just before the season.
Just before, so it'd be Ronnie Dyla. Then it'd be like Rangers came back. Then, as you said, double treble, invincible treble, double treble. Every season end, you could put a tagline on it, and I think that's what's missing for this one. People are looking for a story to hang this season on, and maybe
a world record treble, lads. Hey.
Well, that could be it, but fans aren't really engaging in that a wee bit. And there's this thing about people are just looking for a wee bit extra, aren't they?
I think you've hit upon something there, maybe inadvertently, but I think you've sort of tried.
If it was good, it was on purpose.
Yeah. So I think we are. And the reason this article came out, in my opinion, and the reason people have been talking about it and people have been leaving early and all this sort of stuff and talking about the various reasons and excuses for Celtic's, I don't want to use the word boring. It hasn't been boring. It's been a good season overall. We're really only talking about the last couple of months. I think it's the Champions League thing. I really do think it's since having gone out to Bayern Munich, there was the huge high of that, taking Bayern Munich most of the way, almost getting an unthinkable result in the Allianz, and then it comes down, and then everyone's kind of like, right, what's this season about now? It's kind of
it's about beating Rangers, or we didn't do that.
I think it's just the Rangers game at Celtic Park. I think it's that. Bayern Munich was brilliant. But
what I mean is the story of the season, as Jamie was talking about there. What would the tagline be of this season? Had it not been for the fact that, as you said, the Rangers game happened, then there was a little dip after that. It would have been about how we made a mark in Europe. Finally, after all these years, we turned up in the Champions League and didn't look out of place. It's just since we've gone out of that, and Brendan Rodgers acknowledged that as well. He said since the Bayern Munich tie, this team hasn't been at it. That's when he started questioning mentality. So I think it would be wrong to look at that as just some coincidence. I think those two things tie in directly. It's that going out the potential massive high and the huge disappointment of going out of the Champions League, I think, has just sort of let the air out of the balloon a little bit. But that's all that to say. It is the air is going back into the balloon.
The balloon is definitely getting a pump just now. Do you think it's bad for Celtic, this relentless winning? I mean,
I'm far more interested in that, I have to say, than Scottish football,
I think it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. Relentlessly winning like this and building your reputation and building your bank balance and ensuring access as many times as you can to the top table of the Champions League and everything that attracts, Melly, I don't think should be bad for Celtic or any club. That shouldn't be bad for business. The only thing I think would be bad would be the side effect of that, or maybe an unwanted side effect, what might be, and we have seen it with Celtic, there's absolutely no denying it, and it's complacency.
Yeah, you're probably right there, the effects it can have on Celtic. But Celtic, how many title challenges have they had over the past 14 years? Maybe 2, 3? Less than 5 anyway. So Celtic have been going at this their own. The problem with some of those league titles and success is, we'll always point to it, you did nothing in Europe. In fact, we get embarrassed in Europe a lot of time, and we've went about solving that this season. But I think it has to be, like you say, that continuation. That it can't be one and done. We competed in the Champions League this year. We went out against Bayern, but we can't do that anymore because, as you say, success brings us money. This season, the end of this season is going to bring something new that we've not seen in a while, is the Champions League qualifiers. So that's something at the very start of the season that sort of can get behind, and if you could get through that, you're at the top table, and there's that discussion recently about Champions League or a running Europa League that's been sort of stirring on the Discord and on a Patreon podcast. So I think you have to marry it up with, yes, winning the league, but you need that European success as well. But crucially in there, you need to beat your rivals more times than not.
I think we're in a catch-22 when it comes to Europe, Stephen. I think we are good enough to get into the Champions League, but not good enough really to make any significant or lasting impact in it. And it's just a weird quirk of where Celtic fit in the table. I think I do worry about the complacency, but I don't worry about the complacency with Brendan Rodgers, because it's quite easy to look at Celtic, that the winning machine that they are, really created by Brendan Rodgers first time around, and then look at that and go, look, he's got the easiest job in football. All Celtic do is win. But the problem is, when you come into an environment that is so high performance, kill me. If you come into right, I couldn't think of the better word to call it, right? But if you come into that environment, there's almost no room for error. There's no days off, because you've set the stand, whatever that standard is, whatever that looks like, how much care and attention and energy and focus Brendan Rodgers puts into that, and Callum McGregor and all the players. It's a huge challenge to keep that going, and I think we've seen that with some of the players recently who just have came and gone. Your Telios or your
how did he get
exactly the Norwegian guy that's in LA now, completely forgotten his home. There's countless players who have come in and immediately just disappeared, and I think it's that environment, that level. So you can say, it's Celtic win all the time, but there's work that goes into that. We don't just get presented the trophy at the beginning of the season. It's hard work, and it's keeping that winning machine going and the expectation of the fans. So my only concern my only answer to the question is this ultimately bad for Celtic? Of course it's not. But there are people at the club who need to be aware that this is the standard now, and you cannot get complacent. Everyone must be laser focused.
Yeah, well, it's the biggest cliche going, but it's worth reiterating at times like this. But you do set your own standards, and if Brendan Rodgers is the guy, the kind of godfather of all the success that we currently experience, coming in and winning that invincible treble, then it's very easy. If you set those standards, then any wavering from that is your own failure. Yeah. So those are the standards that these players and the manager have to live with every single day. And that's not easy. And I know
Look at the start of this season. What was one of the first things we said? We want to get the League Cup back, because we didn't win it last season. One season off.
I know. And when we're talking about potentially long term, and the article addressed this, we're not just pulling this out of thin air. We're addressing various sort of bullet points of this article, this kind of, as it described, inflammatory article that has surfaced. It did make the point that it could be potentially damaging to Celtic in that, and it folds into the sort of European discussion as well. If, fingers crossed, like Celtic, if this doesn't happen, but Celtic fail to get into the Champions League next season, right? It's a massive failure, and people are going to take that as a real blow to Brendan Rodgers' reputation again, right? Again, hopefully it doesn't happen. But then if that happens, and we're still just winning trebles with our eyes closed here, much like this season could potentially turn out to be, then you do start to worry about, well, is Brendan Rodgers now taking us as far as we can possibly go? Does he maybe start to get itchy feet? I know he said he doesn't, right? So he said 150% is definitely going to be here next season, but this is just pure speculation and projecting into the future. In terms of players, we've seen it happen before, where players have probably just seen, I've won multiple trebles here. What else is there for me? If we're getting to the Champions League and all we're ever going to do is hopefully finish top 24, we'll maybe draw a big gun and we'll maybe get close and we'll go out. But we've kind of done that now as well. So what's the next goal? And we have a go at players like Kyogo and to a lesser extent Matt O'Reilly for seeing their futures elsewhere. Not have a go, but you know what I mean. The questions are always asked about why you would give this up. I do worry that going forward, if we're just raking in trebles under almost no competition whatsoever, players do start to think, well, I've kind of sealed that chapter. Yeah. It's maybe time for a new adventure.
Is that the key? Because thinking back to when we've been doing sort of at the match stuff, remember the Hibs game not long ago where they came in the cup, and you're like, there's a bit of jeopardy here, and we've not felt that for a while. I think that's it. It's that competition where, when we think back to this time last year, Celtic had to win every single game. They had to go out and win it and get ourselves back into this title race and get the double one. The year before, we were on the way to a treble, but we beat Rangers in the Scottish Cup semi-final. If Ange's team had went out and lost that semi-final to Rangers, there's no treble. The year before, under Ange, we had to pull together to get Celtic through every single game, and went from 6 points behind to winning the league by 6 points. There was jeopardy. There's not been that at all this year. We need more competition. We've had Hibs come to town this season to Celtic Park in that game I spoke about. Celtic beat them 3-0. And they didn't. That was them on a winning run where they've been playing well, came to Celtic Park and just didn't show up.
I read about we basically sitting here going to hurry up with your takeover, Rangers.
Aye.
Are we like in a roundabout way saying, look,
Look
it
at
would
the
be the
rest.
worst thing for Scottish football as a whole, and Celtic being part of that, if Rangers got their act together, if Aberdeen got their act together, if Hibs got their act together, and people wouldn't be calling these things.
Hibs have been taken over by they've got the Bournemouth link, haven't they? That's
Yeah.
not really came to much fruition. Hearts with the Tony Bloom,
Yes.
that's not really came to much. They finished the bottom 6, fortunately. Rangers take over, and Aberdeen stormed at the start of the season, and then somehow are still maybe finishing third despite not winning for
And
how
in the
long.
final. Yeah.
Well, and that's your story about how bad the rest of the league are.
Hibs were bottom of the league and now they're third.
I
Yeah.
think what I find, I don't know if it's just my perception of this, but I do remember being a lot younger and when Rangers were all conquering, them being carried through the streets of Glasgow on the back of journalists, everyone praising how good Rangers were and
There
how
wasn't a lot of trebles then.
and how fantastic this
No.
Rangers team are. And then the minute the shoe's on the other foot and the Celtic are the all conquering, it's kind of like, oh, this is a bit boring. This is a bit naff, isn't it? We need to do something about
I'm
this.
old enough to remember Celtic finishing fourth
Yep.
and stuff like that
Aye.
in the 90s. Joint fourth, I think, at one point as well, we called it.
Aye.
Which is effectively fifth. So I remember that, yeah. And as you said, not that many trebles. So yeah, changed days indeed.
Speaking about stories of the season, I think there's a few that have sort of unfolded in the podcast as we went on. I remember I was recording a podcast not so long ago, maybe just before the turn of the year, sort of talking about Callum McGregor, talking about how maybe it was not a vintage season for Callum McGregor, not one of his best. In fact, I think we might have even went as far as to say probably one of Callum McGregor's worst.
Get him out, fraud. Is that what I'm saying?
I think that's exactly what you
Not
said at
my
the time.
captain.
He said, I think Stephen said, not my captain. He had it written on a t-shirt. He goes, but McGregor's been good recently. And look, the game the other day was an absolutely terrific afternoon of Celticing, and we all loved it. But
Yeah.
McGregor was good, and he's been good in the Champions League. And the story of his season was maybe it's starting to pick up a wee bit now.
Yeah, when Celtic, Callum
So
McGregor's
patronising sounding, isn't it? Well done, Callum. You're starting to pick up a wee bit now.
yes,
Good job.
that high performing footballer
Aye.
does well.
Okay.
He's stepped up again, hasn't he? I think recently he's had that sort of injury that Celtic were managing, taking him off in the odd game, and he missed the Rangers game, of course. But when Celtic are at their best, it's usually Callum McGregor's at the heart of it, and he was at the heart of everything again at the weekend. He just manages to pick up the ball, and seeing him, there's no many players that have got a trademark finish, but Callum McGregor is getting a finish that's getting further and further out. It's great to see him. He's got that sort of finish at Hampden. We all remember the wee ping when Dembele lays it off to him, and he just slotted it past Wes Foderingham. So he's won for the great goal against Motherwell in the invincible double treble.
League One Wes.
Oh, yeah.
West Ham now, isn't he? Living it up.
Some agent. Aye.
But Callum McGregor was great at the weekend, and when he's in full flow, I still sometimes when he bangs in a goal at that, saying sometimes I just want to see you play a bit further forward and see how many he can get. But that's him along with a lot of Celtic players into double figures, and I think Celtic are only 5 goals off scoring the most goals we've ever scored in a season, and we're calling it boring.
The guy's a brilliant footballer, Callum McGregor. He's outstanding, and even if we have questioned him at times this season, overall, again, he steps up. I think, again, I don't think that's a coincidence that Celtic, when it comes to cup games, that's when the jeopardy comes in, and that's when the stakes are high, and that's when this team turn up. We've said it so many times, and I think the Brendan Rodgers stats of the Scottish Cup came out after that game. What was it? Played 21, 120, drawn 1 in penalties, and
Yeah.
it's ridiculous. And the romance of the cup, the whole point of playing cup competitions is that sometimes things happen, sometimes there's a cup set and the bigger team goes out. Never happens to Celtic, and Callum McGregor's a big part of that. Turned up once again, and I caught myself thinking, like, at all times, once a player gets to a certain age, there's a lot of discussion over at least getting him some support for that role, because there's next to nothing, and we've had that for years. We've got Callum McGregor playing far too much football over the years, but at the very least that, if not outright replacing him, getting that physical, athletic midfielder that presumably exists somewhere. That
Kouassi?
Kouassi. So it's so many pretenders to the throne over the
What
years.
are you doing here? Not in a racist way.
Yes. So there's been many attempts at trying to replace that. Previously it was Scott Brown, but then Callum McGregor has slid into that role. But I caught myself thinking what an absolutely brilliant footballer Callum McGregor is, and it's a privilege to have had him here for this amount of time. I know that we've been discussing today on this podcast about how the story of the season has been one of relatively little challenge as Celtic are marching to potentially yet more glory, yet more treble glory. But there's been minor plot lines in there, such as Daizen having the season of his life and Jota coming back, which was exciting at the time, and will James Forrest score a single goal in a
WrestleMania weekend? I thought he was going to do it there.
Yeah, we have framed the streak as very much one of a triumphant closing of the loop instead of urging an
The
attacking.
Daily Record have stolen that part off us, by the way.
Instead of urging an attacking footballer to score one single goal in an entire season.
Do you know the Daily Record have stolen that part from us?
Really?
They've started talking about the streak, but they're talking about Brendan Rodgers' Hampden streak.
Oh, right.
So
okay.
they've sort of, we stole the part as well.
Yes, yeah. But the Callum McGregor, so
Yeah.
where I was going with that is that there have been minor plot lines along the way. As I say, Jota and Daizen, Adam Maeda, is he still hanging from the night before? the minor plot lines along the way, but Callum McGregor is just underneath it all. He's just bubbling away. It's just a magnificent football. And that performance, don't want to get carried away, but I remember thinking to myself that all the talk about replacing him one day, that better be yet another record signing. It's going to take serious money to sign a replacement for Callum McGregor, because I look around at the other midfielders we've got, and taking Ray Hatate out of it entirely because he's a sort of mercurial talent in there, but you could roll together Paulo Bernardo, Luke McCowan, Arne Engels, roll them into one player and they wouldn't be anywhere near as good as Callum McGregor. And I don't say this to have a go at Arne Engels, but we've spent £11 million on that guy. And I'd be comfortable saying right now that he'll never be as good a footballer as Callum McGregor.
You are minusing Arne Engels when you put Luke McCowan in with him. Like, offensively, you're taking attributes away.
I rate Arne Engels, and I think next season could hopefully be his year as he grows into the role a bit. But I saw what happened when you took Callum McGregor out of the team, and everyone thinks, well, we'll play faster football when you take these kind of iconic figures out of the team. I just don't buy it at all. Arne Engels played his role against Rangers and it just didn't work. But I don't say this to have a go at Arne Engels. I purely say that to make the point that Callum McGregor's a tremendous footballer, and it's going to take untold millions to hope to come close to replacing it, because we've
still got 5 years, Stephen. Don't worry about it.
We've thrown £11 million at a very good midfielder so far. Well, a good midfielder so far, not on the same planet as Callum McGregor on his day, nowhere near it.
I do worry about that a wee bit. I've got to be honest, because Callum McGregor's level of consistency over the years is unheard of. Callum McGregor's level of performance week in, week out across all the games he plays for season upon season. We're talking about how long? When did he make his debut? 2013 or something like that?
Wasn't it? Yeah.
Dyla. So, and then
as a slightly mediocre winger.
So easily 7 or so years, maybe. Callum McGregor's consistency has been ridiculous. The last couple of years it's ramped up, and I'm going to digress here, right? I've been thinking about ageing as someone who regularly appears on camera for the past 5 years. You can go back and look at how you looked 5 years ago. And I read this article that says like men age in two. You don't gradually age. You have 2 big age steps.
Right.
So like in your mid-30s, you age a lot. And then that carries you through to your like mid-40s. Then you age a lot again. You get a 1-2 punch. And I thought when Callum McGregor came...
ducking for number 2.
I know, you better bob and weave that one, man. He goes, rope-a-dope.
Thanks for the warning.
Take it right in the chin. So when Callum McGregor came back from pre-season, someone was like, God, he's aged. This is the first season I'm looking at Callum McGregor going, he looks like an older footballer.
Yeah.
He looked like a young player up until like this season. And that, when I saw him accept his Man of the Match award, we've watched Callum McGregor turn for, as you say, that wee winger to a guy who looks like a very senior, almost older pro. He's still in shape and all that, but I just mean the way he's aging. You think, we've watched that guy's whole career and he's been basically excellent. And what you were talking about was the replace of Callum McGregor. We're never going to do it.
No.
You might get someone who embodies the spirit of Celtic the way Callum McGregor does. I think that's in part why we're keen to get Kieran Tierney back, and he's keen to come back because he's younger than Callum McGregor. So that sort of avatar of what Callum McGregor is, Kieran Tierney will be the next Celtic captain. I think that much is pretty obvious. But in terms of a player with that longevity, with that ability, maybe we might luck out. But the best you can hope for, I think, is the likes of getting someone who, Matt O'Reilly, but they're here for a year and a half, 2 years, and then they go.
It's not going to have the longevity, is it? Because you looked when Scott Brown was here, you had Callum McGregor and Kieran Tierney. Kieran Tierney leaves. You're looking behind Callum McGregor now and like, no midfielders. There's nothing. So it's going to need to be, and that's why I'm always of the opinion, like, we need to keep guys around that get what it means to play for Celtic, and Callum McGregor is that, because players will come in and maybe this season, like Brendan Rodgers said, have taken their eye off the ball. Callum McGregor will be having a word with them. Like, that's not what we do here. We've seen it with remember, 2 mentions for him, but remember Odin Holm put that Instagram post up, and then it was quickly deleted. That's Callum McGregor on the phone. Like, we don't do that here, mate. Talking's done on the pitch. He's got that from Scott Brown. That's what Celtic do.
It is really, it's going to be difficult to carry that, and that, I think, another reason we're bringing Kieran Tierney in, because it goes back to the sort of continued success of Celtic, and is it born? You need that through line in the dressing room, because if you've got this constant churn that Celtic do, and players coming in knowing at the back of their head they'll be out of here in 2 or 3 years anyway.
Same with managers.
Stephen, you mentioned Arne Engels, and he was good at the weekend. I thought he was okay, but Rio Hatate was excellent again. And with Hatate, he's come into a bit of criticism on the podcast and from Celtic fans this year, just because he's been really, really hit or miss. But that's the story of Rio Hatate at Celtic. And it did get me thinking, like, who, if you had to choose a player, if you could only pick one, would you rather the sort of low-key, solid, week in, week out consistency of, say, Arne Engels, who you can pretty much bank on getting like a 6 out of 10 performance every week?
Yeah.
Whereas with Rio Hatate, you're either going to get a 3 or a 9, and there's very rarely any in between. But those 9s are absolutely brilliant, and the 3s you're screaming at them
at 6, but for very different reasons.
So you're screaming at him and you're tearing your hair out, and then like every so often he'll turn in with a piece of magic, and it's not just over the course of the season; it's in games. We've seen it with Brendan Rodgers. Hatate will have honking games, and everyone around him starts to get hooked, and you're like, why is he leaving Hatate on? And then you go, that's why.
Yeah.
We hope he turns up with something here.
Yeah, I think it does boil down to, it's a conversation that's happening quite a lot in football now about how it just used to be better in the kind of 2000s. It used to be more exciting. There's quite a lot of that stuff, and I saw a video the other day about how look what it is we're watching now, and it was just centre halves passing to each other.
Yeah.
And I think everyone is pining for the good old-fashioned maverick, someone who just takes something on and makes something happen.
I'm not going to let you skip over that point of view. Do you think there's something in that? Do you think football was previously more exciting than it is now?
I don't know. I haven't really thought about it much, but I do know there's a growing movement for that, and I try not to get too nostalgia tinged when I think of stuff like that, and that might actually form a little bit of the discussion about Hatate if I come back to it. But I think there's definitely something in it. I think the pepification of football is maybe, it's not really necessarily his fault. He was hugely successful with that. It's just when lots of crap imitations of something start seeping into football, that's when it becomes a bit of a drudgery. So I think maybe, but football kind of moves in cycles. You might have some revolution that completely changes things quite soon. But
4-4-2's coming back.
Good. Yeah, about time. It's about time. Trump won, so it's time to bring back 4-4-2. Where was I going? Sorry.
Hatate.
Yeah, so the pining for the likes of your sort of mercurial talents that make things happen. And I think Rio Hatate is, on his day, very, very capable of doing that. So I'm conflicted on Rio Hatate versus Engels, and it's not really about versus those players. It was just for this particular game in the semi-final, Arne Engels was functional so that the other two could stand out. Those two flourished. I don't know if you'll ever get a performance where all 3 midfielders are absolutely outstanding. So on this occasion, it was McGregor and Hatate who kind of stole the show. But Hatate, I'm conflicted because the cold, calculating analyst, the pundit in me, because that's what I am, thinks, but it's better to be consistent. A consistent level of reliable performance where you go in and you do your job. But that is fighting with the
football fan in you.
Yes, the football romantic in me, who thinks it's better to be great occasionally than good all the time. It's, people will crack up at this comparison, right? But is it better to have been Oasis and delivered 2 albums that changed the world than be Kasabian, who delivered 7 albums that were okay and nobody really remembers that well? Is greatness better than being good? most of the time.
Yes.
It probably is. And for a football spectacle, from a fan's perspective, it probably is better to be...
Melly's
to have
absolutely fizzing out that racist thing there.
Well, not
Shifting in his
that,
seat.
it was the opposite of a racist thing. But, yeah, part of me will always hope there is room for a Rio Hatate. And where I was talking about the nostalgic nature of it is when you compare them to the sort of Mavericks of the past, even the recent past, you don't have to go back too far. You've got the likes of Tom Rogic.
Yeah.
Even going back 20 years now for Nakamura, the likes, these very, very talented players. Were they brilliant all the time? Or do we just remember the amazing highlights?
I think the Rogic one is good because it gives me an opportunity to butcher his name again. And people have been waiting for that one.
Go away.
People are waiting for that one for me. Well, and he's definitely the Rogic in this Brendan Rodgers team for sure. I think that's a pretty fair comparison.
He had whole seasons where he was fairly disappointing, Rogic, but we still look back on him as this like legendary figure. Rightly so, in my opinion. I've made that case many times because of the moments, the magic he produced on when it mattered. Do we need the distance now? Do we need Rio Hatate to maybe leave? And then 2 or 3 years later, we're looking back at him thinking,
we just need to maybe just tickle up the good games a wee bit more. Give us a handful of those more.
Rio Hatate is a joy to watch when he's on his game, but he just doesn't have those moments like Rogic does he? And look, not many players do. We've seen players over the years come and go from Celtic and don't have what Tom Rogic had.
Well, he had his moment against Rangers under the lights at Celtic Park.
Yes. Yeah.
But I could name 3 or 4 Tom Rogic games where he had that, whereas Rio Hatate's sort of on the cusp of the games. Like, he was brilliant at the weekend again, him and CALLUM McGregor at the heart, everything good for Celtic, but he doesn't have that finishing moment a lot of the time, and it probably will take for him to go and then another player to come in and we'll go, we need a Hatate type player, doesn't it? But that's kind of the
circle
game,
of life.
It's the game, and it's what's going to happen with Celtic and these things. I've always spoke about a couple of players in Rogic and McGregor. You're not going to get longevity from a lot of players, especially a guy coming over from Japan. I don't see him staying for 6 or 7 years. So Rio Hatate is a joy to watch, but he's just not got that extra something that propels him above, and that's why he's at Celtic. But when he's on his game, he's a joy to watch, and I would always prefer that, because when we look back, you don't remember the bad games, do you? You remember the good stuff, and we're seeing it right now. Bringing back Jota, best winger we've seen at Celtic. He's not playing now. He's not started the last 2 games because Jota does have quiet games. Scott Sinclair, what a winger. Didn't get a game for his last season at Celtic. So I would remember the highlights, and the highlights are always going to be the thing that keeps you going.
Liam Scales, we've not spoken about him for a wee while. I know, Melly's absolutely fuming. Look, we can have this conversation any way you want. I think Stephen said before we started the podcast, Melly, that he's turning into a bit of a Greg Taylor. He's seen off all comers. Greg Taylor, I think, is when he's placed back from Schlupp. There was a wee blip there where Schlupp seemed to be the first pick, but now Greg Taylor's back in the team. Another player, I thought Greg Taylor was really good at Hampden. But Liam Scales is, he's sort of gotten his place back a wee bit from Trusty. We've seen that a couple of times. Trusty's never made that position his own. He's been in and out. Nawrocki came back for a while, but Liam Scales obviously seen him off as well. So it looks like Brendan Rodgers' favourite centre-half pairing is still Carter Vickers and Liam Scales.
Right now, he's in there on merit. Don't think Nawrocki did much wrong in his appearances, but do I see going forward Celtic having Mike Nawrocki as their first, second, third choice? No, I don't. So I'd rather Scales and Trusty playing.
Brendan wants that left-footed thing, doesn't he?
And Liam Scales, well, I thought he played well at the weekend. He's there on merit. I don't know if Trusty's been dropped or it's something to do with his sort of family situation, but it doesn't matter. Liam Scales has came in and he's played well in the games he's come in. He does offer something different. I think I was lucky enough to be at the coaching convention recently, and Brendan Rodgers spoke about when he takes players out, you can't take players out and be silent with them. You have to tell them why you took them out and what you expect of them. So he says when players come out, he tells them what he wants from them and what to look for. And I think when we see Liam Scales coming in, he's not doing some of the stuff he used to do, like standing there with loads of space in front of him and waiting. He's driving into that space now, and that's what gets Celtic moving. I think as well what helps Liam Scales and Cameron Carter-Vickers is Adam Ida's up there, and the amount of times Celtic could pick a pass from centre-back to striker or central midfielder to striker, and then it just bounced back. It gave Celtic that opportunity to be a bit more forward thinking. I don't want to say direct as if it's punted up the pitch, but I thought Liam Scales was good. I did catch myself at the game. There was a point where he goes to pass the ball and passed it straight out the pitch, and I'm going, there you doing it again. Then I caught myself, went, he's done it once in the whole game. Calm down. I'm letting old things that annoyed me about Liam Scales do that. He's been fine, and I think probably going towards the end of the season, he probably is the starting centre half.
In terms of Scales coming back into the team and fully cementing his place back in it, I think it's early days for that, because it's only a couple of games, but Trusty has get married and then had a child in quick succession, which is pathetic during the season. Absolutely ridiculous. He should be concentrating on his football. Less marriage, more training.
Yes, less babies.
Yeah.
Less children on the pitch.
Definitely that. But it's early days. But in fairness to Liam Scales, there's two ways to look at it. You could look at it fairly easily, come to the conclusion that Trusty's just another expensive flop who you can't get in the team. I don't believe that, but it's just posing the other side of it. What you could also look at it is that Liam Scales has done exactly what we call for all the time. We need competition in this squad that should bring out the best in players who are vying for that position. We've said it with James Forrest over the years. We've said it with Greg Taylor. Greg Taylor has his game has kind of gone up a level ever since he has had decent, viable competition for that position. So the way I'm looking at it is that, Trusty's come in and Scales just had to fight for his place back and win it. Early days, I don't know if he will be the absolute number one first choice, and I know that people will then say, well, what does that say about the recruitment? But all it says to me is that Liam Scales is playing well for the moment, like he has done in the past. He was good at times last season, so yeah, all power to him. That's how it's supposed to work around here.
Do you like us? If you would like to support us and get extra podcasts, extra videos and extra writing, you can do that on patreon.com/20minutetims. We've got thousands of people literally subscribe to our Patreon for extra Celtic content. It's coming up to the end of the season. There's going to be huge games, huge moments from Celtic, so you can check all that out and follow us there at patreon.com/20minutetims. There's a link in every bio. Subscribe to us on YouTube if you're watching there, and we will be back next week.